So welcome this afternoon to I guess you guys are the last team standing for the final panel, to the cross-domain integration panel. I'm Vice Admiral Bill Merz, OPNAV N9, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfare Systems. To my left is the exceedingly talented team that I have the pleasure to work with every day. The first 6 of them are commonly referred to as the High Nines. I'll introduce them in a minute, and at the end we have Mark Andrus from N2N6, OPNAV N2N6, the Information Warfare Directorate. So this is the team responsible for coordinating with the fleet, coordinating with industry, coordinating with our labs and our research teams to identify the warfighting gaps, to identify solutions to close those gaps, the how much, the when, and the how to do it. So this is the team with all the answers. So hope you take advantage of that. This is a large board. I'll just make a few structural remarks here on what I hope to accomplish, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists. So today I hope to explore how our investments in technologies, capabilities, operating systems, and even our concept of operations enable the flexibility and the lethality that we need going forward. So this is a panel that can literally discuss from space to the seafloor, cyberspace, cross-domain, cross-acquisition, and virtually all the nooks and crannies of the workings in the Pentagon. So I think we're moving in a positive direction. For those that have seen me on the other panels, we've had some challenges. I think as we typically do, we drill that back into the process, we adjust, and then we move forward. And I firmly believe we're on some of the most positive trajectory I've seen in the U.S. Navy in my 30-plus years of wearing the uniform. So in support of and in close alignment with the guidance provided by the Secretary of Defense and the National Defense Strategy, we, as the Navy, continue to focus on improving our competitive posture, and I'm sure you've all heard the Chief of Naval Operations make that a key point going forward as we develop the maritime component of the National Defense Strategy, which we refer to as the Navy the nation needs. It clearly takes a village to do this. It's exceedingly difficult to move out in any direction without a change in culture that we've been harping on, and how we get more out of every system, every operation, every dollar we spend. Clearly need to be more agile on how we require a capability, how we employ our enablers, and how we receive our funding. The good news is we do now have an enacted budget. I had this panel speak at the Surface Navy Association, and at that point we were still waiting on said budget. The bad news is we again went half a fiscal year without a budget. And now we're in a dead sprint to catch up with the funding. So to their credit, and clearly with much appreciation, Congress provided a healthier budget than expected. And it's a 2-year attempt, and we'll make good use of it. So in concert with the themes of the sea, air, and space of learning, competing, and winning, we must have a broad and sustained support and coordination with our services, our industry, and our congressional partners. So with that, let me introduce the panels. I'll provide them the opportunity to make a few opening remarks, and then we'll open it up to questions. So to my immediate left, starting in literally numerical order, is Dave Hahn. He's my N94. He's also the Chief of Naval Research, so he's dual-hatted. This is part of our restructuring to pull him into the 9 organization, and that connective tissue has been extremely powerful in moving stuff from concept to realization. To Dave's left is Stretch Kaufman. He's our only Marine on the OPNAV staff. He's our Director of Expeditionary Warfare as OPNAV N95. He is now fully conversant in mine warfare, so bring those questions. To the left of him, we have N96, Rear Admiral Ron Boxall. He's the Director of Surface Warfare. And then we have Rear Admiral John Tamman, our Director of Undersea Warfare, N97, followed by Rear Admiral Scott Kahn, N98, Director of Air Warfare. And then from the 9 perspective, the guy that pulls it all together, the grand integrator, is Rear Admiral Jim Kilby, our N9I. And at the end is Mark Andrus. He's the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Informational Warfare, and he also serves as the resource sponsor for that organization. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave, and we'll head down the line here.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Nice to see you. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty with this my opening salvo here to kind of set the stage, and then turn it over to my counterparts to move this along. So if we get the first of 15 slides, please. No, just actually, we got one. All right. So how many of you got to keep that up there, if you would. We have a. There we go. So how many watch the Masters or follow golf? Greater than 0, right? So I liken our challenge to that kind of competition, right? You have got people who are experts at handling equipment. They are working in an environment that is shared by all of them in their competitive space, and they've got to operate in that environment, and it changes throughout the course of a very contested set of not minutes, not hours, but days. And they have to operate with precision. And they operate with the equipment that they're given, right? So as we consider our problem set and look at how do we program, how do we go from ideation to delivery of capability at scale, I liken it to that environment. We have to operate with precision, and in the theme of cross-domain integration, what is the cross-domain piece of that Masters play where Patrick Reed clearly put himself in a position to do very well, even though nobody thought he'd be in that position? Same equipment, same course, same weather, same hole placement across those 4 days. He was competing with himself and others, and he optimized all of that to get to the end point. So cross-domain integration. The cross-domain piece there, as I look at the game of golf and put it in our context of naval warfare, that ball has to operate in all those environments. It's got to operate with a driver and a putter. It's got to move through that space, no matter if it's raining, it's sunny, it's windy. The grass is long, the grass is short, hit a tree or not, Jordan Spieth, right? And it's all got to happen and get in the hole to score. That's it. It's the ball. In our vernacular, that ball is the data. So I look at our problem space in that game of golf, put it in that context, our ball is the data. So the data's got to move across our environment at speed, all kind of conditions, work with all kind of clubs, right? All kind of tools. And just imagine if we were to operate with the level of expertise and precision as Patrick Reed did across those 4 days in our contested environment with our data, right? And make our data do what that guy did with that ball, no matter where that ball was found at the end of every single stroke. Because it was not optimized, yet every time he had that challenge set, the guy put it in the hole and did some spectacular things. So our cross-domain opportunity is our data. Today we're not operating that like we need to, and that's when I step back and look at the whole problem set, that's where we're going to be focusing a lot of our energy inside of the beginning of the R&D phase that has to work across all of these domains with all these clubs, right, in all the environments that these folks provide equipment to the operators to go and do the job. So that data is present at the sensor end, it's present in a combat system, it's present in the communication system. It's got to get delivered across the targeting phase to the weapon. It's got to be made available to everybody at the speed at which we expect this game to be played. And we got to operate it with it being clean or dirty, doesn't matter. And then we got to start doing things to it that nobody else is doing, right? I have to be able to take it and put a fade onto it, or draw it, or put backspin on it, or do whatever I need to do to the data to make it perform in a way that I need it to perform with precision to put it in the hole to score. Because if I don't score well, I don't win the competition, right? You can be the greatest ball striker in the world, but if you don't do it with purpose, you're not going to win that competition and end up on the top of the leaderboard at the Masters. And that's the competitive space that we expect to operate in, and we put our people in a position to operate in. So we've got to figure out how we're going to deal with our data differently to get it to that level of optimization. So I'll leave it with that, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Dave Kaufman from N95 Expeditionary Warfare Division. Great to be with everybody out here. I agree with our senior leaders, of course, that we are at a strategic inflection point as a nation, and that change offers both risk and opportunity. In our N95 shop, Expeditionary Warfare Division, we have kind of two threads. We have a very specified task working for Admiral Mers and his partner, Admiral Bill Lesher, in the 8, in the planning, programming, budgeting, execution process. There, as resource sponsor, requirement sponsors, we do 6 or 7% of the Navy TOA that runs across kind of the cats and dogs platoon of the Navy, if you will. So we do amphibious warfare, and really a centerpiece for that. Mine warfare with specific shops set up to coordinate those efforts. Naval Expeditionary Combat Command, the Navy Expeditionary Navy, more or less in total. And we have a shop that does the entry point for Admiral Szymanski and NAVSPEC WARCOM, the Navy SEALs, for service support. So that's our kind of small pants, as I've said in other forums. We also have a big pants pair that's written into Title 10, and for that we approach an attack more broadly in support of naval integration. So as we've done in other panels like this, and as I'm trying to do for my seniors, Navy, Marine, Dawn, SOCOM, and others, we are supposed to be helping along that pathway. So this is right up our alley in terms of cross-domain or integration across different parts of the Navy, or as we describe it, the Navy Marine SOF team. So we think that we can exploit this period of change and that we've got a great trajectory in a number of areas, and happy to talk about any of those, as the boss said, that might interest you in the discussion period here. And really setting the bar high, because it is time for next generation expeditionary warfare. So a lot of what we've been working on over the last months and couple years is to set the table for that period of change and make good decisions as we move through this strategic inflection point into the future, prepared for the threats that face us. Our baseline premise is that our nation's naval, expeditionary, and amphibious forces are, dare we say, unique and a vital part of the nation's defense. And nobody else on the planet can do what our country can do in the literal battle space. And for this type of discussion, what I try to emphasize is the literal battle space, where water meets the land, is where all the domains come together. And in my view, this is where the issue is decided in warfighting. Warfighting from the sea. This is land, this is water, this is their land. I've been saying it this way for about 40 years. I need to do something over here. Here, I have to get from my land to their land to influence what they might do. That's an expeditionary campaign, and expeditionary simply means an away game. So here is where sea control and power projection come together to win the naval campaign. So we're attempting to revitalize naval maneuver warfare per CNO's comments regarding increased maneuver and access for his force, for the Commandant's aim to improve his ability to deliver warfighting from the sea, and do that as an enabling force for the naval campaign and ultimately for the joint force. So in accordance with the defense strategy, very clearly called out, and great opportunity for my portfolio, small pants, and for our integration efforts, big pants, because we believe that the Expeditionary Navy and Marine and SOF forces operating in this literal battle space where the domains come together really do serve as America's inside fighters across the range of military operations and ensure access and maneuver for the naval campaign and the nation. Now, I always have to point out, if you didn't notice, as the boss said, a little different, but different in a couple ways. I'm different in the N95 portfolio as well, because we're a non-union shop. So we are not directly aligned to any of the 3 traditional Navy tribes. You'll hear from them directly. Many of you have are card-carrying members of those tribes. We are not. So we are domain agnostic, and we are non-tribal. we want everybody to get along. We want to talk to everybody. So we're looking for lethal, survivable, networked, and unpredictable capability to lead the way, access and presence for that naval and joint campaign. As I've learned from some of the coaches I've picked up over the last 6 months, many of them here this week, I'm supposed to be kind of equal parts advocate and critic for the industry partners. Many of you we've met with this week already. We'll do that with you too. Be advocates for where you're trying to help us go. Seek your support, and critics of what it cost, or critics of is it good enough, and as we balance the capability, cost, and schedule to get there. So look forward to working with you on that. Again, didn't want to go any specific thread either. We can take any of my portfolio if you have interest in that way. And then I think where we've done these before, we'll find out that 3 or 4 of us got to say something if it's in my area, because we get nowhere without the support of the rest of the naval force to do the parts that we're supposed to do in our mission area. And we're really after Commandant's challenge number 1 from the Marine perspective: integrate the naval force to fight at and from the sea. So we're about cross-domain integration, cross-service integration, and enabling a joint campaign so we can win when the nation calls. Thanks. Sir?
Thanks, Stretch. So for those of you we had a similar panel at the Surface Navy Association a symposium not long ago, and after that I read some of the blogs like you shouldn't do, but I did anyway, and it said things like, oh, it's a bunch of gobbledygook. It's just, everybody wants to be cross-domain integrated, blah, blah, blah. And it really bothered me because I'm thinking I'm the only one here who's actually the deputy for the job I have right now. And so I've done this twice. I got it wrong before. No good deed goes unpunished. So I went, and I look and I said, well, what was different then about what we do now? I mean, what's changed? Why are we better at cross-domain integration? And it really comes down to, it's not about personalities, because we had always had good people kind of up doing these jobs. But it's different because, in my particular world, when I was the deputy, our job was to come into surface warfare and make ships as good as you can possibly make them with the amount of money you have. That was really what we drove to do. And what we have seen over time with we look at the rise of different threats out there, and we realize that, hey, it's not about us surface warfare. It's about us, the entire Navy, and how we better bring all our forces to bear. So, fast forward a few years, and now I'm sitting here in the job I have, and I've been here, I think, longer than anybody in the requirements job. I don't know if that's good or bad. But I look and I say, well, what is it that, how are we using surface ships to maximize the capability of our force? And conversely, what is it that I need submarines, aircraft, and the network to do to improve what I can do with my ships? That's what's different. And so when we want to go talk about it, that's what we're trying to communicate. And so for those of you who are going to go write that this is a lot of gobbledygook, please do. I'll continue to ignore it, and unlike you. For the rest of you, I would suggest that there are some things we're doing differently. For example, in my area, as surface warfare, I look at my force and say, what is it that surface ships bring to the fight? And surface ships, we're not going to go, well, if we go underwater, that's a bad thing. So we're not as good as submarines, that's for sure. All right? I've never gotten a ship so far out of the water that it actually left, and it was an air element. So they do things very well in what they do, and we need to look at that. But what ships do is we carry stuff, and we integrate the force. We are persistent, we are present, and we have capacity. And we are around the globe, and that's what we do. So everything I do has to look at how do I optimize that force. So nodal, networked, be able to communicate when I need to be able to target, be able to counter-target, to make sure that our forces remain as counter-target as we can. So as I look across those things, I look at the other, I did learn from my first tour, and I realized that, we have a lot of different programs kind of in the air, but we really don't, even inside of surface warfare, the things I own, I really don't have a plan. We have a shipbuilding plan here. When that's done, what's the next ship? So we've taken an approach, and some of you saw we unveiled a little bit of it at the Surface Navy Association, called the Surface Capability Evolution Plan. And this isn't just a shipbuilding plan. It is linked with the shipbuilding plan exactly. But unlike a shipbuilding plan, it shows what capability I need at every phase along that way. What do I need those ships to do? And how are those ships networked with those other air, surface, subsurface network components that make us effective warfighters? And finally, the last piece that I look at is that if I'm going to be networked, then what I have found that the more things I have that are the same, the better. We've not done a great job at that in the past because we tend to go get a program, and we would run out of money, and then we'd take what we can do, and we just continue to put systems on life support. In a declining budget environment, we've made some choices that have forced us to create unique systems. While I think we've done some good job of improving those systems, the fact is that we think commonality is key to an integrated force. And so as I look towards things that I value in the future for ships, and also in my ability to operate with submarines and aircraft, then I want it to be something that works in a common environment. And so the decisions we've made with Frigate, for example, are almost entirely related to commonality, to government-furnished systems that we know we will have on other ships that will talk to each other, and we still have a lot more work to do. But I just wanted to give you a few of those three themes that I think are valuable for me as we think of cross-domain integration. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. So first and foremost, I'd like to start off by thanking the Navy League for putting this forum together to have this conversation. And I think, during my tour of the various booths down below, you can really see that cross-domain piece when you go from booth to booth. And particularly, in my particular area, looking at UUVs that do mine hunting, to unmanned aerial systems that provide us targeting, and then the flip side of that is systems to counter those small UASs, which is something which is becoming more confounding with every passing day. So again, thanks to the Navy League for doing that and putting this forum together for us to talk as a group of resource sponsors. Again, I'm the lead advocate for the undersea domain, and we understand the undersea domain to be all the effects from within the sea and from the undersea. And I will, I was kind of looking for a thread I could really talk about here at the panel today. And being a submariner from the early '80s, back when we looked at ASW, anti-submarine warfare, as kind of a submarine thing, we were, very proud of our ability to do man-on-man type ASW. Well, things have changed since the early '80s. I mean, the submarines that our adversaries possess are, exceedingly quiet and exceedingly harder to track than they were back in the '80s. So it has really put a fine point on just how much cross-domain integration there needs to be for something like Theater ASW. And we have plenty of examples here, over the past several years of, the team getting together, starting with queuing from the integrated undersea systems, whether that be fixed, mobile, or deployable, the P3s, the P8s, providing the air queuing for us, relying on the surface ships to provide the continuous active sonar, and then again, looking at, the Helo squadrons for providing additional anti-submarine warfare. And then lastly, the host of unmanned systems that we're developing today to act as gap closures for stuff that we don't have capability. I think if you listen to the panel Admiral Merz was on this morning with Mr. O'Rourke, he talked about ARCI as being one of those innovative things we did back in the day. And to show the convergence of the domains, you can see that concept of rapid commercial off-the-shelf insertion has spread to the surface community, to the air community, to the information dominance community, as we try to use similar hardware and similar algorithms to get after how we're tracking submarines. And again, in terms of tight budgets, I wouldn't say decreasing, but tight budgets, that's very important. You also heard if you went to lunch today, you heard the Commandant of the Coast Guard talk about the Secretary of Defense's direction to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And what we get with cross-domain integration is not being duplicative on capabilities. We really don't have the top line to go after the same capability for all platforms. So each individual here provides their piece of the puzzle. And then Ron talked a lot about interoperability. Why buy systems that aren't interoperable across the force? And not just across the force, really across the group of allies and partners we have. We have to be interoperable as well. The other example I would give on, really how we're being cross-domain is if you looked at the 30-year shipbuilding plan, you looked at, part of that being the Tactical Submarine Evolution Plan, you'll see how we've baked into the plan capability evolution for the submarine force. But what that does is it lets all the other domains know where they can insert their piece of the capability development, in a time domain, so that we all come together at the same point with the right force and the right lethality and the right relevant lethality at the right time. And I'll go ahead and stop there and pass it over to Admiral Khan.
Okay, Scott Kahn, the Director of Air Warfare. For those that don't know, N98, anything that flies, whether manned or unmanned, is in the portfolio. Any weapons you put on those aircraft, whether manned or unmanned, is in the portfolio. Aircraft carriers, to some degree, is in the portfolio. And all those professionals who fly, operate, and maintain that equipment is in the portfolio. So it's really a distinct honor to be able to lead this organization. In terms of what I see different, from years ago to where we are today and where we are resources-wise, we now have the ability to budget to a plan. And part of that plan is being driven by the National Defense Strategy, where probably job one is rebuilding readiness by building a more lethal force. And that is how we're allocating our resources. And then when you hear leadership, CNO, talk about the Navy the nation needs, which is the maritime expression of that National Defense Strategy. He talks about a bigger Navy, a better Navy, a more agile Navy, a more networked Navy, a more talented Navy, a more ready Navy, and a more lethal Navy. And that is the tack where naval aviation is going down. If I would put that in a carrier air wing, and naval aviation is much bigger than the carrier air wing, but using that as an example, we're looking to build a bigger air wing, a better air wing, a more agile air wing, a more network air wing, a more ready air wing, a more talented air wing, and a more lethal air wing. And I won't talk about the bits and pieces and the bright, shiny objects that are in the portfolio, because the weapon system that flies off the carrier is the carrier air wing. And it's those system of systems that gives us that lethality. And today's discussion is about cross-domain integration. In the past, I think we've tried these things because we could. I think what's driving us today is because we must. And that's recognizing that we are returning to a great power competition across the globe. And this is something we must do in order to fight and win. And many years ago, I think it was Admiral Giambastiani that talked about 4-block organizations in terms of the method by which we apply our joint force. And it could be deconfliction, coordination, or synchronization. But look at where we are today with our cross-domain integration and being able to push data and information across the various networks. It's really getting to a point of interdependency. And that's what we have to solve. Everyone is going to have to be good. From an AI perspective, artificial intelligence perspective, we're going to need better planning tools. We're going to need better decision tools in that complex environment to work in those, whether it be the space, air, surface, subsurface, or cyber domain. And the last thing I'll say, and part of this is just based on my experience, there's that one domain out there that no one ever talks about and everyone takes for granted, and it's our most asynchronous advantage, and that's the human domain, our people. And one of my priorities within naval aviation is to make sure that those people that fly or maintain those airplanes can fly those airplanes and employ those weapon systems to their design limits and beyond, because that's what we're going to need to do. I'll stop there, and I'll wait any questions you may have, and I'll turn it over to Jim.
Hey, thanks, Hayden. It's great to be here. I think you're going to get a lot of engagement out of us for a lot of reasons. It's unique. This is my 3rd time in the resources job on the OPNAV staff, 4th time in the national capital area. And I don't recall a time where all the high nines had previous experience with each other. And I think that's paying extreme dividends now for all the reasons the folks to my right explained, and what Mark Andrus will talk about when he gets the mic. But it's very important now. And a word Satan often uses is interdependency. And so it's not just hardware interdependency, it's the understanding between communities of the dependency upon each other, which I think I'm seeing more and more every day. Without going into great detail about the POM process, I am Admiral Merz's guy to put together this whole system. And we're doing it in a way where we're trying to harvest and use the expertise of and experience in all the communities to come up with the best solution. And that sometimes is hard, because people have to get in the room together and talk and really get to the level of understanding and appreciation of what we're talking about. But it's happening at a level I haven't seen before, and it's certainly not happening because of me. It's happening because we must do that, given the complexity of the threat and the interdependencies of our systems and reliance on each other to make it work. So it's an extremely exciting place to work right now. We bin things, I bin things typically in 3 bit buckets, which are readiness, think ready in the CNO's vernacular, capability, there's a lot of words here, better, networked to the gentleman to my left, agile, all that's important from a capability perspective, and then capacity is bigger, right? So that is a capability in itself if you do it correctly. Putting together that correct program that you can defend to all Navy leadership about the best way to move forward is what we're all about in the N9I. So I do it with the gentleman to my right, and we make sure that we put together that program from a lot of different perspectives. In January, I talked about a requirements community. So established last year by the CNO, I told you we were going to give our third course, our first course in January. Our third class commences on April 16th. So that process is underway. And that program or that content is very dynamic right now as we try to get it right and understand what it takes to make requirements officers, track them, and bring them back to the building in that capacity. So I'm super excited about that. A lot of work to go to make that happen, but the first thing to do is start and then understand where you're going and track it accordingly. Continuing education is a piece of that. That's a place I'd give myself an F on my report card submission to my boss, because frankly we're trying to get the course right, but we know we have to do that to make it viable and continue. I'm the JCID's point of contact for the Navy staff. That means I'm the JCB rep, prepare the VCNO for JROC. So all those connectivities and connections to the joint staff come through N9I. There's a panel that Admiral Mers chaired today on rapid acquisition, and that is part and parcel with all the folks to my right, Admiral Hahn on the end of the table. But the question you need to ask is, should we accelerate a capability, how best to accelerate that capability, and then how to build it into our system. So that's a separate process that we're spending a lot of time and effort to get right, accelerated acquisition. A future fleet architecture I talked about, so all the plans that you talked about from SCEP or TSCEP or Master Air Plan, all aligning those plans to understand opportunity in our future. That effort is underway in the N9I. Herculean effort, right? Because the tribes don't always like to share their cheese. But aligning those programs and understanding where the opportunity lies is the work that has to be done so we can introduce that capability correctly and understand, again, to use the word Satan Khan uses, the interdependency between our communities. So I think Stretch said he's non-denominational. You heard me dub him the preacher at SNA. I'm agnostic to community, and I am that purposefully because I view myself as an advocate for not only the high nines, but N2 and 6 and all the other capability to correctly acknowledge it and build that program we need to. So it's transparent, more collaborative than I've seen it in the past, and we are integrating and are using that domain or cross-domain approach every day with each other and making the right trades to build the best program for the Navy the nation needs. So I look forward to your questions and your interaction. Mark?
Well, I guess it's time in the program to get back to golf balls. I was thinking this whole time about something funny and clever to add to that opening monologue, Dave, but that one was a curveball, so to speak. For those that missed it, he made the analogy of data to golf balls. But it's very appropriate when we talk about information warfare and data. We're more than data, right? We're the sensors. We're the networks, the communications, the weather. We are the people that bring all this together, and you kind of heard that demand signal that we hear every day from our partners over here to do more with the platforms and weapons they deliver. That's what we're out there to do. So we're that glue in the cross-domain piece. We're also have an obligation to deliver unique effects in and from both space and cyberspace. Relatively new in this world order, but certainly a demand signal that's very strong, and we all see it very clearly every day. And third, when it comes to this changing landscape of warfare, this idea of a fleet design and distributed maritime operations, and you heard a little bit from Admiral Khan on the desire for battle management aids decisions. That fleet design, that operational level of war, how to maneuver a force at that size and scale, it's all about decision and data and bringing that information together. So those are kind of our big focus areas that we're working on. All three are important. What I wanted to do, just to kind of bring together the excellent venues that were pulled together here at Sea Air Space, is not talk about the programs or what we're doing inside of there, but the message is really in how we're trying to bring these programs forward. So on Monday, you heard, if you had time, Admiral Danelle Barrett. She's our CIO and our Director of Cybersecurity, looking at data and architectures. She talked a lot about what she calls compile to combat in 24 hours. So she is doing almost a Lean Six Sigma deep dive into every friction point that exists in the software development cycle to try to trim those down so that we can be quicker, more agile, and hopefully more cost effective. Looking at things from the ship installation process all the way down to the information assurance process. So it's all about speed and agility. We had Margie Palmieri talk to you in 2 different forums. She was at the IW Pavilion talking about the Digital Warfare Office. Right? Her and her team working with the PEOs, the SysComs, and ONR and NRL. They are trying to establish that architecture next, right? That place for all these programs to land into. Where's the optimal place for the data to be hosted? What's the format it needs to be in? What's the optimal transport? She's doing that through pretty extensive modeling of requirements down to data standards, okay? And then you heard her talk with Admiral Hahn about artificial intelligence. So it's easy to visualize that this environment that we set is critical to getting to machine learning and artificial intelligence. The first 2 pilots we've done, the things we've been looking at, have shown that the data has to be together in the right spot and it has to be pretty clean to optimize these algorithms. So that's really the work that Margie's been doing and hope you got to hear those briefs. And then today we had Admiral Chevy from PEO-C4I and Ms. Ruth Youngs-Liu from PEO-EIS. You know, they were talking about, again, about speed of delivery of whole capabilities, not individual programs. They've got a lot of individual programs they got to field in these ships, submarines, and aircraft. But Carl is looking at it from the standpoint of, I have to deliver whole capabilities to the fleet. So he's doing things such as standing up a lead capability integrator, people that report directly to him, overseeing all of the programs, able to synchronize training, software drop, installation, because each program in and of itself won't deliver a whole capability, or it certainly won't optimize a whole capability unless it's done in sync. So that's where Carl's focusing. Ruth, on the other hand, on the enterprise side, she's got a philosophy of buy it like it's built. Okay, we're all moving into this cloud, this era of cloud. It's there. We're already moving into it. We're exploring how to leverage that relationship between a float cloud and a shore. And this buy it like it's built is critical. If it comes like it's built and you don't modify it, great. If it needs some modifications, maybe we'll look at swapping it out, right? So take compile to combat, a framework for rapid agile DevOps, a future architecture building towards AI, and our main acquisition partners trying to synchronize this fielding at the speed at which our threat is coming at us. That's kind of the themes we've laid out for you here, and I hope you had a chance to get into it. The last thing I want to talk about is our information warriors, and just to quickly highlight what Admiral Kohler Vice Admiral Kohler is Information Forces. He's the IW TICOM, Man, Train, and Equip. We're on a full sprint out there as well. So this last May, he stood up, or March 2017, we've stood up the Information Warfare Development Center. Think of this, it's built on the Top Gun model from Naval Aviation. These are your hardcore Red Bull drinking, you know, horn rim glasses, super geeks, right? These guys and gals are trying to integrate capabilities to inform the next tactic, you know, the next CONOPS, and feed that back to the fleet. They're also closely, probably more than any other warfare development center, codependent on these other warfare development centers. They don't deliver all these capabilities alone. It's about enhancing those tactics that the fleet's going to employ. Also this year, for our sailors, we've got what we call the Information Warfare Training Group, modeled after the Surface's afloat training group. So now we're down at the waterfront before ships deploy, systems of systems training, Comp 2X, those types of things to try to really make it real, take those tactics and techniques, make sure the operators are fully equipped to do it. And then the last thing that we've got is what we call for each strike group, we have an information warfare commander, post-major command 06, educated in the arts of all of our disciplines, cryptology, comms, all of them, but really there, and electronic warfare, there to bring it all together, reporting directly to the strike group commander. I think you had one. Admiral Kilby was one of the ones that was able to first prototype these. And those are building with each new deployment. We're taking those lessons learned, feeding it back to the Information Warfare Development Center, and putting a guy at sea or gal at sea trained with all the skills they need to assist that strike group. And with that, I'll end it and open it up our questions.
Thanks, Mark. So as you flock to the mics, just a couple overall overarching comments here. So this panel is large. It's large on purpose to kind of relay the scope of what we deal with every day. Could be larger. You saw Admiral Burke on the previous panel. He's also an independent resource sponsor who works personnel issues for pipeline and accessions and the personnel that these gentlemen control within the resource sponsorship. We also have Dixon Smith, the N4 logistics and lift. And we're also starting to mainline our reserve force. I have my reserve CO over here, Gabby Creighton, F-18 pilot, who manages all the reserve component personnel within the nines, the largest in the Pentagon. So it is a large organization. We have a lot going on. I'm glad Mark went last as the N2, N6. This is complex business, and he hit on a lot of areas that don't really pop out when you talk about warfare, and that is the world of digits. And I think we're in a good place in the cyber world. We have our 10th fleet. We have our fleet cybercom. Mark's the resource sponsor for that. We have grown to 16,000 cyber warriors in that command. We have 58 now operational commands, 29 reserve and 29 active. So we're attacking this on all fronts. But just as we work together in the Pentagon, this whole machine has to grow together. It's very easy to get fixated on growing to the 355-ship Navy, but all this stuff has to come along with it. We have to have the air wings, we have to have the cyber environment, we have to have the CONOPS, we have to have the guidance. And when I said I think we're on one of the most positive trajectories I've seen, that's what I mean. Everybody gets it. Everybody is leaning into this. So we trade off. Either I'm chasing these guys around the Pentagon or they're chasing me around the Pentagon. We laugh together, we cry together, a lot going on. So with that, start off with you, my right.
Thanks, Admiral. Kurt Hamill.
If you could just say who you are and who the question is for, or if it's just a general question for the panel, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Kurt Hamill, worked for Esri. Question for the panel. It is good to see so many of the domain experts and leaders on one panel certainly exemplifies this whole concept of cross-domain. But Admiral Becker was quick this morning to talk about how there's 5 systems commands, and he enumerated each of them. So the example I'd give perhaps that seems to unify everybody is this whole unmanned systems question, this whole unmanned systems capability. It certainly expands our fleet, expands our reach, our influence, et cetera. But as each of those systems are being built, clearly the payload for those systems is the information they gather, the sensor feedback that it provides back to the decision maker. I think that's the unifying thing across all these domains, across all those systems. So I guess my question to you is more of a policy one. That is, how are you all able to influence each of those 5 individual systems commands so that they're respecting that payload, that information commonly, they're sharing it, they're managing it, they're providing it to in a common way so decision makers can gather all of that to use that in their operational tactical decision?
Yeah, hey boss, let me start off and then we'll go around the corner here. But I think standardization and the connection to the work Margie Palmieri and the DWO has started is the path that we're on. Kelly McCool down in NavAir has done some great work standardizing a surface track criteria for us to use across all domains. So that's the way we're going to go. And the RQB process, which I didn't camp out on requirements and resources, the board, which we have to approve those things, will introduce and require that adherence to that standard so we can ensure that we have that connectivity. That doesn't cover the sensor piece, but it starts to get at how would you make sure that that alignment is occurring properly and correctly and not created in a stovepipe system, which I can't connect back to. So that's my opening salvo. I'm sure there will be some other comments from the panel member, including Mark Andrews.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And so since he talked about DWO, I'll talk about platforms. The architecture that they are building has got a head start in many areas. And DWO really is trying to set that next level. But over the past several years, this next generation of platforms has been architected with a lot of those thoughts in mind. So just from my past experience looking at Triton, looking at our UUVs, right? The government chose to take ownership of certain key aspects to separate the trucks from the mission systems, to create service buses that allow software to be installed, to own the critical aspects of compute inside those mission systems. And I think that's going to be a huge payoff. It allows us to have that flexibility to integrate what we need in a much more agile fashion. The other thing is, as a resource sponsor, we made some decisions that N2 and 6 kept a lot of the sensors. We keep most of the comms. And so, depending on the payload, certainly from the Intel platform and others, we still own a lot of those sensors, and we just partner with them. I'll give you another example. PNT, position, navigation, and timing. Right? N2 and 6 is responsible across every single domain here with the R&D and the what we're going to buy. They make the decision on at what rate, when to integrate it, et cetera, but we own that from a concentric, so that we don't have a lot of different approaches and we optimize how we buy.
Since it doesn't look like we have another question, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to be the grit in the oyster here. I don't think it's as good as we just talked about, okay? The way that we program is through a programmatic lens, meaning the way we allocate resources is through a programmatic lens. Therefore, the data that should be used by all systems somehow becomes very unique as it enters into the program gray box that the resource sponsor allocates resources against, and the program goes and builds. And then once fielded, I have a set of clubs in my bag that somehow operators need to be able to use right-handed or left-handed, don't necessarily strike the ball very well, and don't operate in all conditions where they need to. And that's got to get fixed through some behaviors, because structurally, the same syscoms, same programs, same resource sponsors, same everything's in place. So there needs to be a fundamental rethinking about how we're behaving and how we look at the data. So the way that I look at it from a cross-domain, it's an enabler perspective, is I look at it, that piece of data as it moves across the system, I look at it as if I'm looking at it through the eye of a fly, right? Programs look at it as if it's through your eye. They bore sight on it, they can see it, they consume it that way. I look at that data and it's got to hit every program space, it's got to hit every system, it's got to be used in ways that we're not even thinking about yet, and our systems don't let it be used. In fact, you talked about this as, hey, it's about the sensors. No, it's about more than that, and those unmanned systems are about much more than that. And we're only going to unlock this space if we start thinking about it different and then putting it into practice different. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be just caught in a new box. And I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be very filling or very satisfying for us when we come out the other end of this. So we have great opportunity. Question is, how are we going to use it?
Yeah, I'm going to clear a little bit of grit out of that oyster, because I think, if you think about it, Jim talked about the idea that we would have, we have our own processes that prevent us from doing the things we've had to do in the past. So I take a look at my missile systems. I have missile systems that are produced by NAVAIR as the program managers are at NAVAIR, and I have missile programs that are at NAVSEA through PEO IWS. Those systems may or may not use the same, close the fire control loop the same way. I'm telling you that we have to get them the same way ultimately, and we're going to move down that path. But I can tell you that as Admiral Kilby or Admiral Murs chairs, or the CNO chair our requirements review boards, that if we come in there and someone says, hey, by the way, this is what we're going to do next, and they don't ask the question that says, does this work for everybody? Then that thing's going to go to the bottom of the bit bucket, and it's not going to prioritize to the level, and we're either going to say, we're not going to make that future investment unless it fixes these things. And so the word to all of you out there who have a lot of these systems is feel free to get ahead of us on this, okay? Because we are that's where we want to be. And one of the reasons we're here is to communicate that message, and we're going to, we continue to do this. But it certainly would be a lot easier for you to go out and knowing where we want to go than to have us come back and say, I'm sorry, that program's no longer because it's just too unique. And so I don't disagree. We have a lot out there, but I can tell you every day we are looking at what we have inside. We don't have a lot of time. We're not going to go buy new networks and do all kinds of, we have to take what we have today and move with it as quickly as we can. The speed is, time is of the essence here. And I know that on the expeditionary side, there's things we can do immediately that may not be the classic way we have always done business that we're going to do differently because we can. And it may not be 100% perfect, but that's the way we're going to go. So hopefully there's light on the horizon here.
Yeah, no, I think you all make great points. I mean, there's an element of the Navy the nation needs and the Navy the nation has. That's the starting point, and we know where we want to get to. But if we have to employ it in anger, we don't necessarily pick the time and place to do that. So, you teed off. You probably feel like you whacked a hornet's nest here, but you hit a lot of.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, right. So this is you picked a topic that generates a lot of discussion within the building. We certainly don't sit around and wait for these questions. We are actively pursuing a lot of these answers, but we are keenly concerned about how do we stitch together the capabilities we have today. And it's interesting, and I think everybody at this table will tell you that we have naturally migrated to those conversations. When I found myself as the Undersea Warfare Directorate arguing for more destroyers, I was healed, and I had seen the light, and I think this entire team here is enlightened on, hey, look, you come from a task force and you're in an exercise and you realize your team isn't big enough or mean enough, and next thing you know, you got a submarine calling an F-18, hey, can you go take care of that guy for me? I got this guy over here, and you're really looking at each other as extensions of your own sensor and employment. The chore for you is to take advantage of that environment and bring it. What capabilities, not necessarily clean slate, but hey, if I move this seeker over to this missile, have you thought about that? Or if I put a V8 in this UUV, what's it going to be able to do? There are very direct and straightforward modifications we can do to the stuff we have to use it in a completely different way. So over to you.
Yes, sir. Evan Thompson. The question's probably for you, Admiral Mertz. 6 months to get a budget passed is pretty ridiculous. It's not good for the Navy, certainly not good for an industry. What is your recommendations, suggestions, thoughts about how industry and the Department of Navy could work better together to get Congress to pass a budget in a reasonable amount of time? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you said that was for me. It's for you.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Most of my adult life in submarine engine rooms, I don't have a whole lot of hearing left. Let's not lose focus on the good news. We did get a budget. There was some talk that we may not get one at all. I will tell you, Congress recognizes the challenges they create for not just us, but the entire U.S. government when they cannot pass a bill. And I will tell you, there's not a congressman interested in defense who did not lay it all on the line to get this budget passed, and to get it passed under a 2-year umbrella. So, should we, face down another continuing resolution in 19, at least we'll roll over at a level that we can continue to operate and move the Navy in the right direction, and the Army and the Air Force as we go ahead. There is a buzz around Congress that there just needs to be some structural changes. There's members of Congress that don't believe the changes are necessary. They are the ones that I would tell you that just don't understand the damage they do, the real damage they do to the fleet that's operating today. As painful as it is for the future programs, it's the readiness hit that we are most concerned with by a wide margin. And this is what drove us to be absolutely entrenched in this thought of balance, that we are going to maintain readiness, we're going to grow the fleet, and we're going to make it the most capable fleet we can along the way. If we cannot maintain that balance, we will not achieve the size we need to, because balance is going to come first. And I think at least the defense committees are behind us 100% on that. And the dialogue we have with Congress right now is as strong as I have seen it. They get it. They've seen the damage, and they are working very, very hard. And I think this BBA is just an excellent example of their commitment. Both sides of the aisle had to come together to make that happen. So yes, it was 6 months late, but the characterization of this bill is completely different than the CRs we've been operating under for the last 10 years.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Allison Akerly, NAV CPO Carriers. So I've heard most of you talk about, new innovations, new things coming up. But in terms of legacy things that are out in the fleet, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of systems, hundreds of ships. And for us, and even right now, I'm working on CVN 78. So, it's been in the process for 20-some years. So there are legacy systems on there, and we find that there's a lot of cyber vulnerabilities and things that are not just CVN 78 specific or fleet-wide type of vulnerabilities and issues. And working on such a large platform, we have to interface with so many different PARMs and stuff, and getting information from them is difficult, as well as trying to pull people together so that we can share common vulnerabilities and, get funding to, Navy-wide fix those issues. So I don't know if it's like a policy or if you guys are doing anything about that, or if you see that. Just comments.
Yeah, I'll make a general comment. I'll turn it over to probably Mark and
I'm happy to take that.
And Sadin. But this is another area. If I could make this board even larger, I would bring up Admiral Johnson and the efforts we're doing in the acquisition side from the Secretariat under Secretary Gertz. And this covers a lot of elements. Our Digital Warfare Office, their first assignment is this model-based systems engineering. So we get this commonality. So PARMs are aligned. The PEOs are aligned. The program managers under the PEOs are aligned. And then maybe we can streamline them. So there's a lot of, like every other area, this is just another teammate that's leaning into it. And if you, I don't know if anybody here was in the opening breakfast at the Cohen Group, but Secretary Gertz, you went right after that exact topic. And and he is absolutely committed. He comes from an environment where you just can't move fast enough. He's a SOCOM guy. Real lives are at stake the next day if you don't get what you need. So with that tee up, I'll start with Mark.
Yeah, so I was going to focus on, in particular, cybersecurity, and it's a fact. This challenge is here to stay, and it's only going to grow. The attack surfaces are going to continue to expand, and there's been a lot of discussions. They had the cyber operations panel. So we see it now growing down into Internet of Things, facilities. I mean, there are countless different vectors from which we can go at, and I feel for the program offices. So what we've been doing, and we are at the start of this never-ending journey. We feel like we've got a pretty good end-to-end approach. We've got venues for the SysComs to come as the 3-star reps to the vice chief to talk about the biggest concerns that are out there and their roadmaps. But I think more importantly, what we've been trying to do is, first of all, come up with that architecture, this defense in depth architecture, harden up the outer shell, get those things out in our area where we can move very quickly. So on the networks, on the C&D suites, we can push extra defenses out there quickly, and over the last 3 years, 4 years, we've been doing that, and we've been getting really good positive results on the measures we've been taking on that. The next big thing we did was get the SysComs to come together and set the tech standards that you as a PEO would have to implement, and I think that's where your challenge comes in. These tech standards are out there. There was some discussions here at Sea Air Space about those tech standards. But those are going to be phased in over time. So the second part of the architecture was to segment what we call boundary control, boundaries within our larger network architecture, so that the HM&E system or the combat system could inherit what we call controls in the IA world, additional defensive controls, hopefully at a faster pace. The third big element of this strategy has been people, right? Education and training. So if you're a pump kicker at NAVSEA, you also need to be a pump kicker that understands to some degree where your pump's connected to. You can't just go throwing Ethernet cables around and plugging things in and taking that data and doing more cool vibration analysis and other things. So we've had a huge education thing. Lots of efforts going on out there. I think we've got a pretty good strategy, but it is a long way off till we get there. The last thing I'll add is when you look at the next set of requirements and capabilities and ships, weapons, and aircraft, they're all able to leverage that and build to those. But you're right, those legacy gaps we're trying to manage through a larger defense in depth architecture because it's a long, long road ahead.
Hey, can I just add one statement from previous job? So Strike Group Commander embarked team on board Vincent to take care of the strike group from a cyber perspective. Very offensive, very engaging, defensive as well. But they weren't just minding the store and checking infiltration. They were also educating the sailors, and some sailors require a little more education than others, and they get their access taken away. So we are self-policing to a greater extent than I have seen in the past, and that's a credit to the people part of this investment to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. So thanks.
Name's Howard Pace. I'm with Viasat. The question I have is for the whole panel, and it basically goes along the lines of, in 1998, we came up with this thing called the IT-21 matrix, which allowed us to field capabilities across ships from a C4I perspective to make sure that each thing that was needed to achieve a capability was fielded. You had the right land system, you had the right SATCOM system, you had the right applications. Now what you're doing, which I applaud, is taking that to the next logical level, which is doing it across all the domains. The number one challenge we faced back in those days was funding by programs instead of by capabilities. Have you given thought to funding by capability sets so that you can make trades? And are you, as warfare directors, willing to sub-optimize a part of your portfolio so that the overall system can be optimized?
Yeah, I want to take this one. So last year, Great question. But last year, when we first started our first foray into how do we take a capabilities approach to it, we said I was in charge of the ASUW domain. And my goal was not to say how do ships do better in the ASUW domain. It was to say how do ships, aircraft, submarine, everybody contribute to that the best. And I looked across, we did kill chains across every weapon, on every platform, in every domain. And I did exactly what you just said, is to come out at the end of this and said, what is it that I recommend investing in across this portfolio? And it wasn't given to me as if I have a dollar amount. It's given to you as kind of like I tell people, just like, when I was a strike group commander, same thing. You don't look at and say, hey, you have this mission to do today. Only airplanes can do it, or only ships, or, you never do it that way. So why should we do that here? We want to look at how we do that the best, what brings us the best capability across the portfolio. And I knew when I did that, there were some things where I looked at my own portfolio and said, hey, I'm actually going to advocate for things here that aren't mine. And likewise, other people are going to advocate for things that I have. So, to me, I think we are doing that. The question is as we go into end game, as we cross over the, Jim Kilby does the integration, as he said. So we are all on that board which values things. And we are all on, warfighters who have had to use these things. So I think part of this has been an education. I think as we repeat offenders here, we're starting to learn our portfolios pretty well, but we're able to communicate what those mean to everyone else. And frankly, I think that's where we've missed it in the past a little bit, is we don't know what the other ones did. We open our eyes now every day and say, wow, we can do that, and case by case. But we are getting those answers exactly as you've described them. That's exactly the way we are moving forward. I think you just clearly stated why it's different and why the blogs that said that, I'm not going to like them if they say cross-domain integration is gobbledygook.
The only thing I'd add is we are introducing some tools which help us do this better and more consistently. So the ability to link elements of a program together, vice doing it manually and trying to keep in your mind the components of Navy Integrated Fire Control, counter air, and make sure that's in alignment. I think we're on the right path to do that. There's a key term here called valuation, and being able to value your program against a consistent metrics takes a little bit of the emotion out of it. And what I try to allude to in my comments is when you get all the inputs for the budget together and they compete, and you have some professional community expertise in the room harmonizing that, you come up with some cases where a unfunded now becomes a funded because it's clearly a key component of that strategy. So I won't go into great detail that. I will say I haven't seen that in the past. All the inputs kind of went together and were integrated at the top, maybe correctly, maybe not correctly, with a little bit more parochialism. And we all are trying to resoundingly say that understanding the capabilities of all of us put together for an aggregate effect is what we're focused on. So work to be done, a lot of work to be done. I think we took an initial stab at it for the boss this time around, but we've got a ways to go to get it right, but we are on the path to get it right.
Yeah, I'm going to take just advantage of your question here to make just a couple quick points. We naturally have migrated to this cross-domain thought process. You heard a couple of times people advocating for programs that are outside their domain because it helps their domain. They get tasked to be lethal in their domain and all the tools that make that happen. We've also kind of migrated to, these are complex threats and they require complex solution sets to deal with these threats. So we're institutionalized family of systems. It's a new definition of an old term, but it means that one of these gentlemen or into the N2, N6 or the N4, they will be the single decision maker for a group of capabilities that are brought together for an effect. And they'll evaluate that from a resource spot for overlap, and some overlap is good. Gaps is what we're most concerned with, and then the resourcing recommendations on how to fill those gaps. I will tell you, industry's relationship with Congress is typically very beneficial to the Navy. But as we move into these family of systems and complex solutions, I never want to get in the way of anybody advocating for their livelihood, but it would be helpful if you take the effort first to understand where you fit in the family so you don't inadvertently unhinge the larger effort. And I think you'll find that these gentlemen are more than willing to talk with you on the best approach to get what you need and to get what they need. What side are we on here? Lieutenant, bold move.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Lieutenant J.G. Chabelli. Admiral Khan, this question is primarily directed to you. It seems like the aviation community has been a little bit ahead in the acquisition of Triton and Fire Scout with autonomous systems. Have there been any unique challenges that acquisition of these platforms have faced, and do you think that there'll be lessons that can be taken on board as other communities look to acquire autonomous systems in the future?
I think there's plenty of lessons. There's plenty of lessons to be learned. The integration of unmanned systems, Triton is a BAMS was out there initially, moving to Triton, that's out there, and it's going to provide enormous capabilities. MQ-25 for the carrier air wing that we're looking to IOC by 2026 or so, maybe earlier, which is going to dramatically expand the operational reach of the carrier air wing through in-flight refueling. MQ-8, in terms of the capabilities that have to put on our surface ships and deploy those, or perhaps put them on the beach and to call them from land. Again, it's that human-machine, manned-unmanned teaming of getting it to the, developing it, getting to the fleet, developing the TTPs, get it in the hands of some lieutenants, JOs that know their business, and they're going to figure out solutions, figure out means by use this equipment in a manner that we never really intended to use it. I think that's been, that's not new. From young minds come fresh ideas. You can put them in the right environment, you give them the right training, they deliver. But I think we're excited about the unmanned capabilities and integrating it into naval aviation and getting it on our carrier decks. And we see this primarily as the end of the beginning.
I think we'll have time for these last two questions.
Yes, Marie Colton, Harris Corporation. We, build big weather satellite systems and data systems and in-theater sensors, for military and civilian applications. Now, my question is not meant to be provocative, but rather evocative. So, and you're intimidating panels, so please understand. About 40 years ago, as a young Navy civilian scientist, I worked in ocean remote sensing, which I still do to this day. And there was the National Ocean Satellite System, then there was the Navy Remote Ocean Sensing Satellite System, and there were always program of record ocean remote sensing systems. And when we were developing all those new technologies and instruments, we hung on the words of the operational Navy of what parameters and instruments were needed. We listened to you, we looked at all those requirements. There's been a long and kind of sordid history about ocean remote sensing in this country, but now there's a new history I'm seeing happen, and that is the advent of CubeSats and small sats and things that are now in a cost, schedule, performance envelope. They're not billion-dollar programs that compete with ships and aircraft and personnel anymore. So I'm wondering, going forward, since we do need these observations to support the operations, where are those integrated requirements for topside coverage and remote sensing being captured among you and articulated to the external community? And where is the resource sponsorship for that going to come from?
That's me. So we have a group that does exactly what you've outlined as far as ocean sensing requirements. It's under Rear Admiral O'Con, oceanographer, navigator of the Navy. So he looks end to end across each one of these guys' domains to understand what is needed to know that environment, whether it be the air, RF, sea state, and undersea. It's been critical for us to do that because, as you might know, the Navy doesn't own all the systems Actually, the Navy doesn't own the vast majority of the sensors that we use to understand these environments. It's a lot in the Air Force, and it's a lot across not only the whole of government, but also with our international partners. So we've got a very deep understanding of what is required, and we advocate at each venue on how to do that. The other thing I think it's fascinating, we've talked a lot about unmanned systems. You know, satellites were big, wide area, huge advantage. But I tell you, we've learned a lot from unmanned systems as well, and how to use those to get at ocean data and RF data. And I see those as a different way that we're looking at and exploring to get after that information.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Lieutenant Jerry Polanka. I'm from the Naval Postgraduate School's Space System Academic Group. And if I could keep the question in outer space again, so space is the other joint operational area for the military, and I was curious because our naval rhetoric has really focused on space as being a check valve. We suck everything down and use those assets, but we haven't really provided much going back in support of the space operational focus. I was curious if there have been discussions on using the Navy's unique capabilities at the maritime level to support the space operational area.
Yeah, let me take that. So, yes. So I co-chair the Navy Space Leadership Council with Vice Admiral Kohler. And I will tell you, and Admiral Merz can attest to this, the 3 and 4 stars get together for these fleet syncs about twice a year. And they tee up the hardest challenges and biggest opportunities that the fleet should go after. And in the 8 years I've been in the Pentagon in this area, never have I seen the attention, the amount of time allocated to leveraging space, getting more out of space. How do I translate space and space language and data and capabilities to each one of these domains? So it's got a huge head of steam. And I will tell you, one of the areas that we are focusing on immensely, and it's going to be huge value with little investment, is our space cadre. This is not an individual community. It's people from every one of these communities that we decide need to be educated in space. So we have AQDs, we have training, and then we have been deciding and rebaselining where across the Joint Force, inside the Navy, at the Strike Group, at our Maritime Operations Centers, that we need space operations people, and we are investing heavily in that. And it is growing by about 3 times its previous. It's not huge numbers, it's not huge investments, but it is a growing force, a growing group of people that are recognized as being very important and going to be a big focus area for us.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, hey, thanks for that question. It really highlights our relationship and our leverage of industry. I mean, there is just eye-watering amounts of investment going into space, going into artificial intelligence, and that's one of our strategies is to partner with the industry and leverage their work, and then we roll in with the procurement side to field it. Okay, I think we have expired our time. Thank you everybody for staying late with us, and have a great evening.